Despite Joker's newfound disease spreading throughout his entire body, it also seems he has this uncanny ability to survive in the vacuum of space. Let's watch as Shepard hurries Joker into the escape pod. That's pretty amazing. When ambient pressure falls below 47 millimeters of mercury, similar to the pressure of the surface of Mars, the water inside all tissues passes into a vapor state beginning at the skin surface. This causes the collapse of surface cells and the loss of huge amounts of body heat via evaporation. After 6 seconds, the process of cell collapse involves the heart and lungs causing circulatory interruption, followed by acute anoxia, convulsions, and the relaxation of bowel muscles. After 15 seconds, mental confusion sets in, and after 20, you become unconscious. You can survive this for about 80 seconds if a pressure higher than about 47 millimeters of mercury is then reestablished, otherwise you turn into a freeze-dried dead meat on a stick. What's sad, aside from Joker's lack of expanding skin, is Shepard's ability to enter and exit doors. It's like they don't want to survive. All he had to do was pull himself in. Instead, he only goes halfway, then goes back outside because, I don't know, maybe they heard something in the vacuum of space? Wouldn't a guy helping a cripple into his chair go all the way, not stop and turn around and look at his mostly destroyed spaceship? Doesn't he want to get into the life pod too? And then an explosion pushes them into the rubber wall they were pressed up against, and boink, off they go. Really? This was the best way to kill off Shepard? Being unable to enter a doorway and being pulled toward an explosion? Here's an example of gameplay that has changed again for who knows what reason. For player abilities, they're all tied into a global cooldown, even briefly ammo powers. How does using a biotic ability affect one's ability to use an ammo power, or use Omni Tool for tech skills, or using Metagel? This was obviously done to stop players from spamming all abilities as fast as possible, but it ends up slowing down gameplay, and also not making any sense. I could understand global cooldowns for all biotic powers and maybe even tech powers, but everything? Is this a turn-based game? Shepard and their squad's abilities seem to be just fine in the last game. For planets, I'm not going to go through all of them, there's quite a lot, but some of the planet descriptions don't make too much sense. Let's take Kerr in the Hecate sector. Essentially, the description tells us that the planet's crust is free of valuable metals, and only has limestone, calcite, and gypsum. It also warns us there's Geth in the area. So when we go to scan Kerr, why is it listed as being rich, and how come there's no Geth opposition? Having conflict in the scanning minigame? Whoa, that might be too challenging. And then there's the Genophage. In Mass Effect 1, it's an infection that makes only a few Krogan children out of 1,000 survive birth.
Thousands die in stillbirth, and most never get that far.
In Mass Effect 2, Mordin tells us the genophage actually affects fertility. It doesn't kill. Fertility, which means to fertilize, which implies a sperm and egg cell combination doesn't instigate a meiosis cell division, meaning insemination doesn't do anything, and there would be no stillbirths. Yet, stillbirths implies there is insemination, fertilization, and during gestation something goes wrong and the baby Krogan is formed and then dies in the womb. So we know it's a sterility plague, we're just not too clear on how it sterilizes. If there were actual stillbirths, there would be insemination, and that would be much more interesting depending on how you determine when a fetus becomes a person, and your opinion how to treat a Krogan. Because boy, does Paragon Shepard act like he's accusing Mordin of murder here, and they changed it so he's not a murderer, but we can't even understand the context, let alone the content of what a sterility plague actually does, because of the contradiction.
Pretty it up however you like. You're talking about murdering millions.
No, murdered no one. Altered fertility, prevented fetal development of nervous system.
This would have been actually a really good issue to bring up because it deals with the concept of abortion. I don't know, maybe it was too mature. Oh, wait, isn't Mass Effect 2 a mature title? Near the end of the game, when Shepard's hanging toward their death, if you decide to have the worst playthrough, Shepard just can't seem to pull themselves up. Considering Shepard is the 4 billion credit man or woman and has had a number of cybernetic upgrades, can fire the Widow anti-material rifle, which wasn't designed for human use, as well as the Eviscerator shotgun, which was designed for Krogans, and potentially getting heavy bone and skin weave upgrades, and 3 of the classes making Shepard biotic, he still can't do a chin-up. Of course, it makes sense that Mr. Glass Bones won't be able to lift Mr. or Mrs. Brick up, but I find this whole scene somewhat confusing. It's like they couldn't figure out a plausible death for Shepard at the start of the game, and they screwed it up at the end, too. Then there's just complete fabrication when real science gets in the way of what the narrative is trying to explain, like humans having more genetic diversity than any other species, which I don't even understand since there's no context. I mean, we've got lots of species that live longer than us, which doesn't necessarily imply a larger and more diverse gene pool, although we do know there are genes that control cellular division, like some genes that cause cancer. So it could be a different allele of an existing gene. But let's look at the potential genetic diversity of the Asari. We don't even know how they mate, but essentially they use their partner to randomize their own genetic pattern for conception. Now, if your species can randomize their genetic pattern, isn't that essentially mutation on a cognitive level? And every Asari has the capacity to randomly alter their genes during mating, whereas human females are born with all the eggs they're ever going to have and can't make any new ones. The Asari aren't only monogendered, are fertile for what seems hundreds of years, they also use their mind to connect with another organism to randomize the genetic material in their own eggs or whatever gametes they use. If you have the ability to recode alleles causing a whole bunch of possible combinations, which implies mutations, by using another organism's code as a roadmap, by syncing up with their nervous system, that's actively instigating genetic diversity. Do that for 1,000 years and one generation becomes dozens, depending on one's sex life, of course. Heck, Asari might not even need another organism to procreate with.
A little radiation would work just as well.
Could that even mean adding or removing a gene or an entire chromosome? It certainly implies changing the genes and their alleles. What other species can do that? It sounds like a fast track to evolution. Of course, there's no talk of Asari failed pregnancies. And if one species is evolving faster than another, wouldn't that make them more genetically diverse? I mean, we're not counting chromosomes in a xenobiology karyotype comparison. If that were the case, it'd be the genus Ophioglossum that would be on top. It has about 25 to 30 different species with up to 1,260 chromosomes compared to humans who are only one species and have 46 chromosomes. Then that raises the question, are we looking at introns or exons of their codes, that's DNA and genes that actually do stuff, and non-coding DNA that doesn't get transcribed? Or are we looking at both? Because humans have a lot of non-coding DNA, like 97% of their genome? Is that what makes us genetically diverse? Now, according to Morden, the probability of selecting random humans in general will offer more diversity, but he says this.
No, ignore superficial appearance, down to genetic code.
Now that's weird since our appearance is based on genetics. So if we disregard basic physical phenotypes, what exactly is so diverse about humans? And are we then disregarding the genes that do give us physical differences? I mean, physical cosmetic differences are still part of the genotype.
Biotic abilities, intelligence levels. Can look at random Asari, Krogan, make reasonable guess. Humans, too variable to judge.
Okay, so because some humans can be biotics and intelligent, that makes us variable? Alright, I guess that's okay.
Outliers in all species, of course. Geniuses, idiots. But human probability curve offers greater overall variety.
Wait, he just contradicted himself. So really the only explanation is some humans can be biotics, but the probability curve of what? What kind of genes exactly? Are we talking the genes themselves, the alleles of the genes, the phenotypes, the chances of mutation, what? We know it's not chromosome count, right? This is of course all in context toward using a certain organism to experiment on for good results. But if you think about getting accurate results, wouldn't a species that has a more stable genetic base be a better control group than a human, simply because they're less genetically diverse, and the hormones and experiments on their endocrine system would be more accurate because their phenotypes are less volatile? Right? If humans are so diverse, wouldn't you want humans in an experimental group and not a control group? Then there's Hastrom's son and your squad, who, after complaining about the sun, seem to not mind standing in it. Guys, you okay there? You want a hat or SPF 1 million or something? How about some N7 armor? There's a few other weird things like this scene. Did you catch it? Watch her face closely. Remember, the Asari is dead. And then this. Let's see that gun again. Wow, I guess that Geth data on thermal clips was right. Soldiers really can reload fast.